My name is Cassia Monroe, and I'm 32. 2 months of planning taught me that love is just as much carpentry as poetry. Measure twice, cut once, sand until it's smooth enough to hold. I was done with spectacle, done with performative romance that photographs well and ages poorly. I wanted something that lived on the hand and in the heart, not on a billboard. The ring began at a workbench behind a fogged-up window where the jeweler looks more blacksmith than boutique. We chose a cushion-cut Montana sapphire, deep teal that shifts with the light, the exact shade Isaac's eyes turn, when he's laughing for real, not for the camera. I asked for a platinum band carved with a breath of Celtic knotwork, a nod to my mother's side, something you'd only notice if you leaned close enough to care. I told myself I wasn't buying status, I was buying meaning. Hours of design, a stone with a story, a band that would be a map back to the day I decided I was done auditioning for a future and ready to live one. The proposal happened in the Arboretum, a birch grove that remembers our third date. Bark like paper skin, leaves whispering in their own language. I set a blanket on late afternoon earth, the sky the pale blue of a sealed envelope. Isaac's hand trembled when I opened the ring box. Mine did too. He cried. I don't think I breathed for a full 10 seconds. Cass, he said, laughing and sobbing, it's perfect. We took the kinds of photos that steal hours from you. His fingers, the ring, the slice of sky between us. He said yes. The world said like. For a week, it felt like the air had learned a new trick. Lighter, easier to carry. Then came the barbecue. It was at Tessa's place, one of Isaac's oldest friends. The backyard was the color of bottled summer, plastic cups blinking in the grass, grill smoke tangling with laughter. I went inside to grab more beers from the cooler on the kitchen floor, the window open, the screen door whispering. That's when I heard it. Our names, my ring, my life, placed on the counter like something you can return without a receipt. I mean, look at it, Isaac said, voice low, a performance meant for friends who clap at the end. A sapphire. A breathy chuckle. It's sweet, if you're into that rustic I forged it in a volcano vibe. Tessa giggled. So, not Jared? Worse, he sighed, and there it was, the shame dressed as humor. She went to her feelings. Maya's awe was the kind that pets dogs and pats heads. But it's pretty. Pretty isn't sparkle, Isaac said, a sentence that didn't sound like him and sounded exactly like him. I only said yes because you should have seen her face, Tess. Shelter puppy waiting to be chosen. I couldn't... He exhaled. Don't worry, it's a starter ring. I'll get Cass to upgrade to a proper diamond before the wedding. Sabrina always said... He stopped himself, laughed. Forget it. Forget. Sabrina, the ex-girlfriend whose taste was a rumor that moved through conversation like perfume. Invisible, unmistakable. My blood went cold in my wrists first. A bright hush. I stayed crouched by the cooler, stupidly tender with the beers, and listened to my future evaporate through a window. The room tilted. The labels on the bottles looked like instructions in a language I used to speak. I didn't storm out. I wanted to. I wanted to be the woman in movies who finds her monologue on the first try. Instead, I stood, smoothed my dress, collected the beers, and carried them back to the lawn. I handed them around like a polite ghost. Someone's dad began a cheerful rant about property taxes. I nodded and hummed and felt the sky press lower. When Isaac finally drifted over, eyes bright with host energy, he looped his arm through mine. Hey, you okay? You've been quiet, he said, his voice soft, the kind that wipes your face after a cry. I slid free. The decision rose inside me like a tide that knows the shore by heart. The ring, Isaac. He blinked. What? The ring. My palm opened, a small, merciless stage. His smile stiffened at the corners. Cass, stop. You're being weird. What's wrong? The silence between us was the heaviest thing at the party. He looked at my hand like it was a cliff edge. The seconds stretched thin enough to see through. Somewhere behind us, a grill lid slammed. He huffed, small, theatrical. Then he twisted the ring off his finger and dropped it into my palm. Fine, be a baby. The metal was warm from his skin. It felt like a living thing that didn't know it had just died. I walked to my car. I didn't run because I wanted every step. I got in, locked the doors, set the ring on the passenger seat like it needed buckling. Before I hit the first stop sign, I blocked his number. The road opened in front of me without a plan. I drove an hour, some angry song chewing the radio to pieces, until the horizon got tired of me. At a gas station that smelled like rain and bleach, I called the only person in his family who'd ever felt unvarnished. Clark, his cousin, the one who never polished a truth to make it fit at dinner. He picked up on the second ring. "Cass, you okay?" The question was a hand on my shoulder. I swallowed. "Not yet," I said, "but I will be." That night, the ring slept in its box on my kitchen table, the sapphire catching the refrigerator light like an eye that knows too much. I kept thinking about how quickly joy can become evidence, how a promise can turn courtroom exhibit when the right words find the wrong window. By morning, the texts had mutated. Unknown numbers, angry paragraphs, apologies with disclaimers. I left my phone face down. I made coffee like a ritual to call myself back. As the kettle breathed, I realized humiliation wasn't the opposite of love. It was its litmus test. If the person holding your future can make your history a punchline, the test has been graded. The answer is already circled in red. I slipped the ring box into my bag. I didn't know what would become of it yet, only that it wouldn't live on his hand again, or mine. Outside, the city moved like it hadn't heard the news. That made us even. I hadn't heard it either. Not really. Not until he said the part about the upgrade like I was a software patch scheduled for later. Not until he almost said Sabrina's name like a permission slip. By noon, the phone was buzzing across the counter like a trapped insect. I silenced it and wrote a list with 2 columns, what I can control and what I won't carry. Under the first, I wrote, lease, ring, silence. Under the second, I wrote, his friends, his mother's voice, Sabrina's ghost. When the kettle clicked off, I didn't flinch. The sound was small and certain, exactly the size of a decision that changes everything. By sunrise the next day, my phone had grown a second life. New numbers bloomed like weeds, paragraphs that began with, "Hey girl, so," and ended like subpoenas. Some were from Tessa, punctuation like thrown stones. Coward move leaving him like that. You humiliated Isaac. Others were from Maya, sugar dusted on top of a blade. He's a wreck, Cass. You know how he gets when he's nervous. He didn't mean any of it. Please talk to him. A few were just screenshots of my own face from the engagement post, followed by the word why. I turned the phone face down. The screen kept lighting up like a heartbeat I hadn't asked for. By noon, a local area code slipped past my guard. I answered and got lacquer. "Cassia, darling," a voice purred. "Diana, his mother. There's clearly been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I said. "I heard him." "Oh, sweetheart." The pity in her tone had teeth. It was girl talk. Isaac was managing expectations with his friends. You know how men are, so easily swayed by bravado. She clucked her tongue. "This has gone on long enough. You've made your point. Time to be a grown woman. Return the ring and apologize for your little scene." It was so bold I almost laughed. "Apologize for embarrassing my son," she said, crisp as a starched napkin. "Whatever your little feelings were, you handle those in private. Adult relationships are not for public theatrics." The only theatrics were him mocking a gift I spent months creating. I kept my voice level, the way surgeons keep their hands. "The wedding is off. We're done." Diana's inhale was sharp enough to cut silk. "You will ruin everything," she murmured, then sweetened again. "Be sensible, Cassia. Think of what you're giving up." "I am," I said and hung up. The quiet after was so sudden I could hear the refrigerator motor groan. I made myself breathe in 4, hold for 4, out for 6. My therapist's voice, years old, surfaced. "Choose what you carry. Everything else is just practice saying no." At 3 o'clock, another number I recognized. The leasing office. Before Isaac and I posted those sun-drunk photos before the barbecue, we had signed a lease on a bigger apartment, high floors, west light, a balcony wide enough for a small table, and a large hope. Move-in was 3 weeks away. In a burst of optimism, I'd paid $6,000 up front, full security deposit plus first month's rent. A lung of my savings. It had felt like flipping the calendar to the life where we grow basil. It felt smart. Love often does when it's not finished yet. Now I wanted out. I walked to the leasing office in person, ring box heavy in my bag. The agent, a woman in a navy blazer with mercy in her eyes, explained the math. Both signatories must authorize termination. We could forfeit the deposit. They'd process the break. I nodded. Send the paperwork. I was ready to swallow a loss if it bought me peace. By dinner, the if arrived in my inbox wearing a suit. Isaac's lawyer wrote with the steeled politeness of a scalpel. Isaac would not sign the termination unless I paid him an additional $5,000 for emotional distress and disruption of housing expectations. He was holding my $6,000 hostage to ransom another $5,000. I stared at the email until the words blurred. There's a special code reserved for realizing the person who kissed your forehead will happily bill you for it. My phone rang again. Another local area code. I shouldn't have answered. I did. Cass, said Richard, Isaac's father. The good cop. The one who delivered quiet compliments at holidays, like they were balanced on the back of a bird. Now his voice carried stones. I'm not going to pretend I understand what's going on in your head, but you're making a mess. You're hurting my son over words. They weren't words, I said. They were a mirror. He showed me exactly how he sees me, as a stepping stone to a bigger diamond. He sighed the way men do when they're arranging your feelings into smaller boxes. He's emotional. He says things. You're supposed to be the stable one. A pause. Then the velvet glove slipped. Look, I don't want to get involved, but I sit on the board of the Children's Literacy Fund. I happen to know your company is a major sponsor. It would be a shame if the board had to reconsider that partnership due to, let's call it unprofessional conduct. One of their employees creating public turmoil. I felt fear then, a little cold knife at the base of my throat. Career threats turn the air thin. Are you seriously leveraging a charity to punish me for not giving your son what he wants? Another sigh. I'm advising you to think bigger than hurt pride. Sign the lease termination he wants. Pay what's fair. Bring back the ring. Be adults. He hung up before I could answer, as if grace were continuing without me. I poured water I wouldn't drink and put my head in my hands. The counter was cool against my forearms. On the far end, the ring box caught a stripe of winter light and threw it back like a small, stubborn star. When I lifted my head, the fear had burned down into something clean. Anger is a fire. Resolve is the brick it leaves behind. I opened my laptop and wrote to legal aid. Then I called. A plain-spoken attorney listened without rushing me. Your options are limited with joint leases, she said, but you are not obligated to pay his demand. That's attempted coercion dressed as a settlement. If he refuses to terminate, the lease stands, and you both remain liable. It's ugly. But you're not powerless. What would you do if you were me? I asked. I'd document everything, she said. Do not negotiate over the phone. Keep records of threats. And remember, silence is a strategy, not surrender. After we hung up, I sent Isaac's lawyer a short reply. I will not be paying any settlement. Please direct all future communication to email. No apologies. No explanations offered to people who had already decided which version of me served them. As if the universe wanted to test my resolve, my car wouldn't start that evening. The battery clicked in a tired, defeated way. I stood in the dim garage, the ring box in my bag, and almost laughed. I could have called roadside assistance. Instead, I called Clark. He arrived in 10 minutes with jumper cables and the kind of face that doesn't make you a performance. We lifted the hoods and stood in the breath of our own exhaust, like two old friends at a winter fair. You don't have to fix everything alone, he said, which annoyed me because it helped. We got the car running. Dinner? He asked, pointing his chin toward the neon diner across the street. I hesitated. I'm not a date, he said gently. Just food that arrives on a plate and is warmer than your apartment right now. At the diner, warmth folded around us, eggs and coffee drawing a border against the day. We talked about safe subjects, his job fixing old houses, my habit of alphabetizing spices when I'm anxious, his grandmother who laughed like a kettle. Every time my phone buzzed on the vinyl bench, he didn't look at it. He looked at me. I went home lighter than I left. Not because anything had been solved, but because someone had handed me a small piece of ordinary and I'd remembered I knew how to hold it. The next morning, the emails escalated. Isaac's lawyer added a flourish. In addition to $5,000, they now wanted me to cover 3 months of rent at Isaac's current place as a transition stipend. The entitlement took my breath and then gave it back as a laugh that wasn't friendly. I forwarded it to legal aid and then set the laptop aside. I made another 2-column list. What I can control. My money. My signature. My keys. What I won't carry. Their urgency. Their timeline. Their family theater. A thought arrived, quiet and complete, like a bird that already knows where to land. It was simple, it was risky, it tasted like sovereignty. I looked at the lease folder on my desk, at the move-in date circled in blue, at the name Cassia Monroe, side by side with Isaac Fairchild. They were using the lease as a lever. Maybe I could make it a lock. I picked up the phone and dialed the leasing office. When the agent answered, I could hear the relief in her hello, the relief of a person who spends their life herding human storms. "Hi, this is Cassia Monroe," I said. "About the apartment. I have a different solution." The leasing agent's voice softened when she recognized my name. "Oh, Miss Monroe. I take it Mr. Fairchild hasn't signed the termination yet?" "No," I said, "and he won't." I took a breath that tasted like metal. "I'd like to take over the lease myself, remove his name completely. I'll assume the full term and payment responsibility." There was a pause, the kind that tests a person's seriousness. Then, "If you can verify income and identity again, that can be arranged." Relief came disguised as exhaustion. "Send me the paperwork." When I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the dark computer screen. My own eyes looked different, less like prey, more like someone who'd stopped running. That night, I drove to Clark's place. His porch light flickered, haloing the tools scattered on the step. He opened the door in a paint-stained sweatshirt and gave me a grin that didn't require context. "Let me guess. The Fairchilds have graduated from threats to theatrics?" "Both," I said, handing him the email printout. "They think I'm cornered." He read it once, eyes scanning fast, then whistled. "They're overplaying. Rich people get sloppy when they're sure the rules are theirs. I just took the lease under my name." That made him smile, slow and impressed. "Now that's checkmate." "Not yet," I said. "They think I caved." "Then let them think it. That's the best cover." He motioned me inside. His house smelled like cedar and coffee. A dog I didn't know existed pressed its head against my knee. I knelt to scratch its ears while Clark poured tea into chipped mugs. "They'll come for a scene, Shen," he said. "Narcissists always need an audience. But you'll have paperwork, timing, and witnesses. Those beat noise every time." I didn't realize until he said it that he'd positioned himself between me and the front door. Not protectively, exactly. Just naturally, like a habit. We sat for an hour, running through logistics. Keys, locks, move-in timing, who to call if they showed up. Then the conversation drifted to anything else. Movies, his failed attempt at making sourdough, the way small towns hide their gossip in church bulletins. At one point I asked, "How did you survive growing up with them?" He laughed softly. "By deciding early that approval is the cheapest currency in that family. You trade your self-respect for it, and somehow they still charge interest." Something in that sentence cracked a wall I didn't know I'd built. I looked down at my tea and said, "I thought loving him meant learning their language." "It's not a language," Clark said. "It's a loyalty test they keep moving." The next weekend, he called out of nowhere. "There's a street fair in Greenvale. Come with me. You could use sunlight that isn't filtered through legal emails." I almost said no. Then I said yes. The fair smelled like kettle corn and orange peels, the air alive with small happiness. Clark bought 2 lemonades, held one out to me without a word, and we walked. People brushed past, faces open, anonymous. It felt like being invisible in the best way, nobody watching for cracks. "See," he said, "world's still bigger than their living room." I smiled for the first time in days, and quieter. We spent hours drifting between booths, pottery, secondhand books, a local artist painting skylines on driftwood. For a few stolen hours, I wasn't the woman in a lawsuit of silence. I was just someone eating popcorn beside a man who didn't need to win a conversation. As we were leaving, he said, "For what it's worth, Cass, you're handling this with more grace than most people would." "Grace?" I said, laughing. "Feels more like trench warfare." "Same thing," he shrugged. "You just swapped rifles for dignity." Monday morning, I walked into the leasing office with every document they could possibly request. Pay stubs, ID, a printed copy of Isaac's lawyer's demand, even an email from my supervisor confirming my salary. The agent reviewed them one by one, nodded, and slid the new lease across the desk. "If you sign here, you'll be the sole occupant and account holder. Once approved, Mr. Fairchild will be released of all obligations." I signed. My signature looked sharper than I remembered writing. When I left the building, the sky broke open. Not raining, but threatening to. It fit. Storms were honest. By evening, my inbox pinged. Subject: termination acknowledged. From Isaac's lawyer. "Mr. Fairchild and counsel accept your decision to assume the lease. Our previous financial requests are withdrawn. We wish you well in your new residence. I stared at it until the absurdity registered. They thought I had surrendered, agreed to shoulder the rent alone, trapped in an expensive apartment I didn't need. They didn't realize they'd just given me everything I wanted: freedom, name rights, full legal control. I printed the email, folded it carefully, and slid it into the folder marked Proof. Then I texted Clark. Cassia, it's done. They think they won. Clark, good. Let them throw a party. We'll send flowers to their downfall. The next 2 weeks moved with eerie calm. Isaac's friends went silent, either out of boredom or strategic retreat. His mother posted a passive-aggressive quote about forgiveness on Facebook, tagging no one and everyone. I didn't reply. I packed boxes, signed utilities into my name, and changed the locks the moment the keys touched my palm. On the last night before move-in, Clark showed up with takeout and a small screwdriver. You know, he said, tightening the hinge on the window that stuck, I think this place might actually suit you. Because it's quiet? Because it's yours, he said simply. I looked around at the half-unpacked room, the shadows from the single lamp stretching long and soft. My chest hurt in that clean way that means healing has started. Isaac's lease at his current place was due to expire at the end of the month. I knew him well enough to guess he hadn't renewed it. He'd been banking on living in the new apartment. The countdown began in silence. Each day that passed, I imagined the clock ticking on the wall of his parents' kitchen, Diana rehearsing speeches about mercy, Richard planning another phone call he'd never make. And then, as the final weekend approached, I received a new text from an unfamiliar number. Isaac, we need to talk about logistics for the move. I assume you've cleared my things from the apartment? I stared at the words for a long minute, a slow smile forming. I typed only, Cassia, everything's been handled. You'll see. No threats, no explanations, just the truth waiting quietly behind a locked door. The final day of the month was coming, and with it, the reckoning they'd written for me, but forgot to proofread. The last day of the month arrived like an old debt collecting itself, steady, unavoidable. The sky was washed gray, the kind of light that makes everything honest. I'd already moved most of my things into the apartment, a coffee table with one leg shorter than the others, a modest bookshelf Clark helped assemble, a small vase of dried lavender that made the air smell calmer than it had any right to. I was unpacking a box of books when Clark's text came through. Clark, U-Haul sighted, 3 passengers, all dressed like they're attending a coup. I didn't have to ask who. Through the peephole, I saw it, the bright yellow truck, the family trifecta stepping out as if returning to an empire. Isaac, pale and purposeful. Diana, phone in hand, her posture halfway between a scolding and a sermon. Richard, carrying a folder thick with papers that I'm sure he thought were weapons. Isaac marched towards the front entrance with his old key in hand. Watching him try it in the lock that no longer knew him was almost biblical. The twist, the frown, the rattled doorknob. Disbelief curdled into fury. Cassia, I know you're in there, he shouted, banging on the door. Open my door. Clark looked at me from the couch. Want me to handle it? I shook my head. No, I built this scene. I should direct it. I opened the door. Isaac froze. Behind me, Clark stood quietly, leaning against the wall, holding a book we'd been sorting. The smell of coffee drifted out. What is he doing here? Isaac spat, pointing at Clark like he'd found a ghost, trespassing in a family portrait. Helping, I said simply. Unlike some people. Diana stepped forward, voice syrup sweet but cracking at the edges. Cassia, let's not make a scene. You took over the lease. Yes, fine. But you agreed to let Isaac move in. That was the understanding. I smiled, small and sharp. I don't owe you an understanding. I owe you a boundary. Richard's tone dropped low and paternal. Be reasonable. She's right. Isaac has nowhere to go. You can't just leave him out on the street. Actually, I said, keeping my tone calm, his childhood bedroom is still available. His mother mentioned it often. Isaac's jaw flexed. You manipulated the paperwork. You tricked me. I tilted my head. You tried to extort me. You mocked me to your friends. You sent your father to threaten my career. So no, I didn't trick you, Isaac. I learned from you. The silence that followed was heavy enough to change gravity. Even Clark seemed to hold his breath. Finally, Diana's mask cracked. You ungrateful... Careful, I said softly. Every word you choose right now will echo in a legal transcript if you keep talking. That stopped her. Isaac exhaled through his teeth, looked at the moving truck behind him like he couldn't quite believe the narrative was slipping out of his hands. Where am I supposed to put my things, Cass? Anywhere that isn't here, I said, stepping aside just enough for him to see the interior. The living room half settled, the faint glow of a home that no longer included him. You're trespassing. If you don't leave, I'll call building security. He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. Then his expression twisted. Fury, disbelief, humiliation, all collapsing into something smaller. You're cold. I met his gaze. No, I'm cured. He turned away first. Diana hissed something under her breath. Richard muttered about regret and career consequences. They shuffled down the hall, the sound of footsteps mingling with rain beginning to fall outside. When the elevator doors closed, Clark let out a long exhale. Well, he said, that was performance art. I laughed, the sound shaking loose months of tightness. It's over. He looked at me for a long moment. You sure you're okay? I'm better than okay. I glanced at the door, then at the quiet apartment that suddenly felt alive. I'm home. Later that week, I went back to the artisan jeweler, the one who'd helped me design the sapphire ring that started all of this. He listened while I told him the story, all of it. The overheard conversation, the threats, the lease, the ending. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he nodded toward the ring box I'd brought. What would you like to do with it? I want it to mean something again, I said. Not for him, for me. He carefully removed the teal sapphire, setting it aside on a soft cloth. The platinum band, he melted down with new metal, reshaping it into two slim minimalist bands. No stones, no frills, just a loop that caught the light like a breath held. I wore one. The other, I gave to Clark. Not as a declaration, not yet, but as gratitude, as proof that something could be rebuilt from what was broken. The sapphire itself became a pendant, suspended on a thin silver chain. When I put it on, the cool metal settled against my skin like a promise I could keep to myself. A few weeks later, Clark told me the fallout. The Fairchild family was in disarray. Diana refused to speak to him after he sided with the enemy. Isaac had moved back home, sulking through dinners. Richard's board connections had quietly stopped returning his calls. Do you feel bad? Clark asked, smirking. I thought about it, really thought. No, I said finally. I feel balanced. He raised his mug in mock salute. To equilibrium, then. I lifted mine. To peace, the kind you sign yourself into. Sometimes I still catch myself glancing at the pendant's glint in the mirror. It reminds me that time, not apology, is what heals things. The sapphire changes color depending on the light, just like it always did. Maybe that's why I chose it in the first place. Not for perfection, but for honesty. I lost $6,000, a fiancé, and a false sense of safety. But I gained a home that's mine. A friend who showed me what real loyalty looks like, and the version of myself that doesn't wait for permission to leave the room. Isaac once said he'd get me to upgrade to something that actually sparkles. He was right, I did. It just wasn't him.